to the December 21st, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Chris Ramey, and I'm the chair of the Planning Commission. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, we will begin by concluding the deliberations on an appeal of the hearings official's denial of a zone change request for RNS Management LLC, City File Z20-7. Following that, we will use any time remaining to continue our deliberations on the clear and objective housing code amendments. Before we begin, the Eugene Code requires that the planning commissioners disclose any conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, biases, or abstentions. Commissioner Taylor has already disclosed a conflict of interest. She left the hearing on this item before it began and will not participate in the discussions or decisions on this appeal. Commissioner Taylor is here with us today, currently, because we have a second item on the agenda. I'm going to ask Commissioner Taylor to disclose the conflict of interest and leave the meeting until we continue to the second agenda item. Go ahead, Commissioner Taylor.
As you all know, and that I talked about the last or 2 meetings ago, the architectural and planning firm that I work for, TBG Architects and Planners, has been retained by RNS Management LLC to act as RNS's representative regarding zone change application Z20-7. The hearing's official decision on that application has been appealed to the Planning Commission, as you all know. Therefore, pursuant to ORS 244.120, Eugene Code sections 2.333 and 9.7065 in the bylaws of the Eugene Planning Commission, I'm declaring an actual conflict of interest with respect to RNS Management LLC, zone change Z20-7, and I will not participate in any discussion or decisions by the Planning Commission regarding this application. So I'm now going to stop my video, and thank you.
We'll see you later. Thank you, Commissioner Taylor. You are excused. Now, as a reminder, we held a public hearing on December 15th, 2020, where interested parties had an opportunity to provide testimony on the appeal. Following the hearing, the record was closed and deliberations were held on December 20th, 2020. Staff was provided with direction on appeal issues and asked to return to us today with a draft final order, which we will be reviewing in our meeting today, right now, in fact. So with that, before we begin to discuss the final order, I'd like to ask the staff if they have any updates.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. As a reminder for everyone, my name is Althea Sullivan. I'm a planner with the city's planning division. I'm joined today by Jeff Gepper, Alyssa Hansen, and Janessa Dragovich, and Lauren Summers is also joining us from the city attorney's office. Thank you all for hopefully having a little bit more of an opportunity to review the materials I sent this time instead of me sending them right before the meeting. So I sent out the draft final order and received some comments back that pointed out a couple typos that we fixed. I'm happy to go through exactly where those are if anyone is curious, but we didn't change any of the substance. It was just changing some punctuation and a few words. And then I also want to give Lauren an opportunity to discuss some changes that were made to the conclusion of the draft final order as well. So Lauren, if you want to discuss that.
Althea, do you mind sharing your screen and pulling up the version with the new final sentence?
Yes.
So commissioners, I asked Althea to make a change to, I think, what is almost the final sentence of the draft final order, adding some new language, which you'll see in just a moment, and track changes that, in my opinion, just clarifies that Planning Commission, there was no majority on Planning Commission with regard to Appeal Issue 1, the meaning of the Oakway Sub-Area Plan number 2. And so that portion of the hearings official's decision stands. Therefore, even though you're reversing the hearings official's conclusion as to adequate support population, because there's still a basis for denial of the zone change application, the hearings official denial stands, and the hearings official's denial is therefore affirmed as modified to reverse his conclusion about the adequate support population by the Planning Commission. So hopefully you can see those track changes. Obviously, if you have concerns or questions about them, we can certainly talk about them. If you disagree, we can certainly talk about that too. But I just thought it was helpful to have that kind of final wrap up sentence.
And I think, I don't know, Lauren, if you have anything else to add, but I don't have any other updates on the draft final order. If there's anything that the commissioners would like to discuss or let me know about that was not sent in email, I'm open to that. I can leave my screen up and we can look at it, or I can quit sharing my screen as well if you've had enough time to look at this item.
Okay, commissioners, do we have any questions for staff or further discussion on this item? I have Commissioner Borofsky. Yes, Commissioner Borofsky.
Thanks. So just going forward, Lauren, if this moves up to LUBA, then they would just be trying to appeal the second item, correct? They wouldn't have to go through and do the full appeal of the whole hearings official. I'm just not sure, because it sounds like we modified the hearings official's decision on the third point, on the adequate number of people. So if a appeal happens, they just have to appeal the other one. I'm just not sure how the logistics on that work.
Well, Commissioner Borofsky, I guess it would depend on who is appealing. I could see appeals from both sides given this decision. And it would really be up to those folks to consult with their attorneys to figure out how they want to frame the appeal.
Okay, that's good clarification. Always interesting processes to view and to be a part of. I have Commissioner Isaacson.
Just as a quick procedural, if it does go to LUBA and they make a decision, would it come back to us further, or is this out of our hands going forward?
Commissioner Isaacson, good question. It could come back. It depends on what LUBA decides about this decision. So if, for example, they were to disagree with Planning Commission that there is substantial evidence in the record to support an adequate support population, they may well send it back on remand for Planning Commission to look at it again. Sure. Or they may agree with Planning Commission, or they have kind of the same opportunities as Planning Commission does on appeal. They can affirm, reverse, or remand.
So in light of that, ex parte contact, all that stuff remain as though there's potentially another hearing in the future, and
That's a great, yes. Thank you, Commissioner Isaacson. That's a great question. Well, so we won't know whether there's an appeal. The appeal period is 21 days after Planning Commission makes its final decision. Then we'll know if there is an appeal. And if one is filed, staff will let you know that that has happened. And then, yes, you should continue to refrain from ex parte contacts because there is a possibility that it will come back to you. If those things happen, there's usually a point where we can declare them and go through the process, but it's cleaner if it doesn't happen.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, not sure we have further discussion. I believe at this point we need a motion. Is that correct? Yes.
That is correct.
So,
I move we adopt the final order by the Planning Commission from last week.
Second.
Wait, can I clarify really quickly? I'm sorry. The final the draft final order
one that Lauren has submitted. Yes.
That was provided to Planning Commission this morning, including the grammatical changes and the addition of the final sentence.
So moved.
Great, thank you.
Seconded.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Isaacson, seconded by Commissioner Borofsky. Any further discussion? With that, I'm going to call for the question. A show of hands, please. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hands up.
And those are in favor, just to be clear, Commissioner Amy.
Yes. Yes, they were. But thank you for that. Wow. Always good to be clear about these things. So with that, I think that concludes our work on this agenda item. Thank you all attendees for attending. I see there are a few audience members. And now we will move back to deliberations on the Clear and Objective Housing Code amendments. And someone will let Commissioner Taylor, I don't know if we were going to text her or how, oh, here she is. So someone did that. Okay. So if we can let her back in the circle, we'll be on to agenda item B. And I see we have Janessa is here. So Janessa, take it away.
Great, thank you. As a reminder, I'm Janessa Dragovich. I'm a senior planner and the project manager for this Clear and Objective update that we're doing. So today, since we're continuing the third meeting of some deliberations on the existing, the proposed code amendments before you, what I wanted to do in the uncertain amount of time that we had to use today was to focus on the remaining items that I have highlighted as yellow on the list that I sent out last week. And my plan was to stop on each of the yellows and then not stop on the white non-highlighted items unless a commissioner has a specific comment or question within that falls within those areas. So Commissioner Taylor did send me some additional comments and feedback, and I wasn't able to incorporate that into the stop list. So Commissioner Taylor, if you could raise those issues as we go along, and we'll just kind of, I'll respond to them as best I can. And if we need to identify some more items as follow-up items, then I can bring those back to you in January when we return, since we know there's already a couple items that I'll be bringing follow-up information on. So with that, I'm going to share, let's see. I'm going to share my screen. And 1 second. So we can all see where we're at. And apologies for the moment here while I get my screen set up so I can see your faces as well as the list I have here prepared. Okay, so the first issue may actually involve opening up one of the straw polls that you did last time related to the tree preservation standards. So we're still working in the 9 let's see. Actually, we're in the adjustment review criteria that we added for the tree preservation requirements. So that's code section 9.8030 subsection 13 was where we left off. And we were looking at some of the specific language related to the tree adjustments for tree preservation. I did have a conversation with Commissioner Taylor that was really helpful in trying to understand more some of the concern about 100% mitigation in the areas outside of the South Hills area, and kind of what we're trying to get at in terms of housing and that kind of that tension between providing housing, protecting trees. We're harmonizing a lot of values here, and wanting to also make an efficient and effective path forward for housing, so that we can address the housing crisis. This particular suggestion in conversation, we kind of came up to a possibly simpler and more elegant solution to get at the issues that we were discussing when we were here last. And so one of the things that came out of it is that another way to approach that might be to leave the adjustment option as the way to get to 100% mitigation. However, to better address some of the housing projects that might benefit more from being able to develop by, how do I put this, to develop more, not have that tension between trees and providing housing, basically. So originally, when we had done the exemptions, we had left R2 zone as still needing to be subject to the tree preservation and removal standards. However, that's another area where we do have that potential sticking point between achieving density and getting housing units provided versus compliance with stricter tree preservation requirements. So an option to consider, if the commission is interested in revisiting that straw poll that directed staff to changes to allow 100% mitigation by right outside of the South Hills area, and to incorporate subsection D from the adjustment review criteria. And you may recall we kind of talked about that was criteria that was written not needing to be clear and objective. One option would be to revisit that and to include in the exemptions to the tree preservation standards the R2 zone, or properties in the R2 zone, and then make some other edits to the adjustment review criteria for when 100% mitigation is allowed. Specifically, there's one subsection that was taken from the discretionary track and placed into the adjustment review criteria language. That is, we already kind of took the first, based on the first testimony that came back, we took a stab at revising that language to make it a little gentler, given the context of an adjustment review and providing flexibility. Staff has kind of thought about that more since the discussions and the concerns that were brought up, and staff is comfortable with removing that criterion from the adjustment review criteria. And I think that might be a better approach, or at least from the staff perspective, to reduce that and make the adjustment review process a little bit cleaner and simpler. And then with the added R2 zone exemption, would like to have Planning Commission discuss to see whether that would get us kind of to a similar place, but with a different approach. And I see Commissioner Taylor's hand up, so I'll stop there and let her also add in.
So I just have a quick question, Janessa, because while I agree with you, I'm not sure we were totally on the same page. Is that and I think this clarification will help me, is Commissioner Edwards had a really good example of development in her neighborhood, and that was R1. So I still am a proponent of 100% mitigation. I'd love to see R2 as an exemption. It gets really complicated when you bring clear and objective standards in. R2, and the example I use is on Rustic Place. There's a medium density housing, and I looked at it briefly, and it's great if we can remove R2 and have it be exempt. But then I do have this question of the tree preservation standards. If we remove that 100% mitigation for properties below the elevation as described in that section, what does it do to something like Commissioner Edwards' example? Because I personally, I would still maintain 100% mitigation is really needed, because I think our ability to fully have effective designs that are balancing all of the criteria and not disproportionately kind of highlighting trees. So let me kind of explain to you what happens in design process. Designers, ultimately designers and owners, quite frankly, my experience is they want to keep trees. Trees aren't the first thing people are designing for. Now, like Oakway Center, little different. 3 trees. We tried to design around those. Now, try is the really big emphasis, but most projects, you don't. You're going to start with topography. You're going to look at drainage. You're going to look at access to streets. There's a lot of components, and you are going to keep those existing trees to see if all of the other code criteria that you're needing to balance, landscape standards, open space standards, setbacks. I mean, it's a lot that if you can preserve trees, you're going to. If you can't preserve trees, trees are desired. So mitigation is great. Yet, so I'm going to go back to Commissioner Edwards' comment. With the current tree preservation standards, if we didn't do 100% mitigation, could that happen? Because I still want that to happen. So in many ways, I wouldn't go back and remove what we've already voted. I would just add the exemption of R2. Because R2, it gets much more complicated because you have multifamily standards that you're meeting, which has other implications in terms of, or requirements in terms of trees and landscaping. So if you could just clarify that, that might make me feel a little bit more comfortable.
I'm not totally sure I understand what I'm clarifying. I'm not familiar with the exact subdivision that Commissioner Edwards lives in, and I didn't have a chance to look into that, or so I don't feel like I can give you an off-the-cuff response specific to that, how that one happened or how that would be. What?
Let me interject really quickly. I don't think you actually, sorry, I shouldn't have used that example specifically. Basic clear cutting. So really, I think that for anything below that elevation, we should allow, basically, I'll just go 100% mitigation. I mean, really, we should allow full flexibility to design and prioritize housing, balance all the other needs. And trees are important, yet trees, they don't necessarily live forever either, which is the example I gave last time. So I'm not sure. So I would maintain the current vote and just exempt R2, which actually adds the more, it was, and when you and I were talking, what we were talking about, at least my understanding, was the complication of bringing some of that discretionary criteria into the clear and objective. And if we remove R2, some of the complications actually get removed because you don't have the extra layer of all the other criteria. So I think if we're just talking about R1, bringing in some of that discretionary criteria as clear and objective to address that section for mitigation is just going to be a little less complicated.
I think I understand what you're saying, because the part of what was difficult was in the R2 or higher density developments. One of the adjustment review mitigation options was to do 1 tree per dwelling unit. And that, as I recall, you raised as that could actually be too many trees to be required on like a R2 multifamily development. So correct, you're right. I misunderstood or thought that was simplifying the approach, because I think we are on the same page, other than that. I think that what you're proposing is to go 100% mitigation by right based on to change that table, versus in my mind, we're already at 100% mitigation through an adjustment review process that has criteria, and then we were going to remove some of those criteria that were problematic and raised a lot of comments, and that's mostly in that subsection C as mentioned. And then I think that that's a planning commission call in terms of whether the by right, which, as you said, it stands in the existing straw poll. So I
Yeah,
think
so
that if you want to propose a straw poll to add the R2 exemption in addition to this, and then I think that the existing straw poll already contains the direction to do the 100% mitigation by right, as well as to incorporate sub D, which had the, for instance, on an R1 subdivision, that would lead us to putting requiring like 2 trees per lot based on square footage of the lot, or 3 trees per lot if it's a larger lot. So I agree. I think that we have what we need if we just, if you want to propose the addition of R2 exemptions.
Great, thanks. That was a good clarification. So yeah, I would just, for section EC 9.6885 2C that talks about the exemptions, I would just propose adding, including R2 as one of the exempt zones, and leaving the straw poll as is. And then we'll get to the adjustment review pieces.
Okay, I've got I've got Commissioner Fregala here in line. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I feel like we just had a lot of information about something that is not in front of me. What I'm looking at, number 24, stopped here, 12.9 highlighted, is a section that I believe we were not discussing. And then we were discussing the adjustment review information, which I didn't have the number for, so I don't have that language in front of me. So it would be really helpful to me if, one, I could have the number spoken slowly of the adjustment review, or if I could see it and understand what we're talking about.
So I can clarify, Commissioner Fragola, that was, yeah, we were jumping between 2 code sections.
Yes.
So we actually are jumping back up.
I got that piece. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, but the document that Janessa shared said, stop here. She referenced starting there, and then we jumped back to the adjustment review. And so it would be helpful to me to understand the conversation if I could have that. And I appreciate whoever just put it up. So we're talking about, can somebody scroll up, please, so I can see the exact number?
Yes. So we're part of the adjustment review criteria. So that starts at 9.8030.
Mm-hmm.
And then
13
is the tree preservation and removal standards. This is a new, it's replacing a shorter section.
Correct.
And then the specific sections that we're talking about, this subsection C. And Commissioner Taylor, that would need to be added to the straw poll if you want to propose full removal of subsection C too.
Mm-hmm.
And Commissioner Fragola, do you want me to continue scrolling down?
Okay, so is this in our original packet, or was this section not? Okay, all right.
This is the original packet.
Okay, great, thank you. So I should be able to find it then.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I just didn't know where to look.
Apologies. It's sometimes hard to know how to queue up kind of some, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is that I understand that we're still having a conversation about allowing 100% mitigation outside of the South Hills. I still am in support of that. And I understand that we're having a conversation about adding the mitigation criteria as well. But we're also discussing removing the R2 exemption that is part of the mitigation criteria.
Adding an exemption to R2 so that the entire set of tree preservation and removal standards would not apply to R2 development.
Okay, and that would be added in section C?
That would actually have to be added to the tree preservation and removal standards. That's part of 9.6885 sub 2 is the main level.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Borofsky.
Thank you. I think I got stuff cleared up through a couple of different things. When I raised my hand, I had some confusion because Janessa was talking about bringing language from the adjustment review, and were you thinking about changing language that would have been from the discretionary track as well? Because that was where in past things we were talking about mission creep and not wanting to mission creep over into the other areas of the code that weren't clear and objective. And I saw that kind of happening in the description that you made. But I think that I've come along because we're not going to be changing that terminology. Is that correct now? Because we're kind of playing ping pong here, and I was just a little confused.
So for context, this subsection C here that's up on the screen, that's part of the proposed adjustment review criteria. This was originally taken from the discretionary track approval criteria for PUDs. And so this subsection C, the highlighted changes were what were proposed staff proposed changes based on the testimony that had come in. However, one option is, as Commissioner Taylor may propose, is to remove that entire subsection C from the adjustment review criteria. There's other criteria to achieve, to be able to get the adjustment that they would need to meet. And so this was just, this was a way to try to bring in some of the concerns that are addressed through the discretionary track into the adjustment if we're allowing more mitigation than what's allowed by right. So that's the subsection C that was talking about from the discretionary track. The language to be incorporated into the actual tree preservation removal standards, but made clear and objective if we change to a 100% mitigation allowance in the area outside of the South Hills area, is this subsection D. And this was the part that kind of gets to an outcome base. Like if you're going to mitigate all trees on the site, rather than doing an accounting and formulating based on the diameter breast height sum of the whole what had to be preserved. This gave kind of an outcome-based and easier thing, so you can mitigate. This is, to me, this is kind of the scenario similar to Commissioner Edwards' subdivision. So this would be something that where, based on the size of your lot, the outcome would be either 2 trees per lot or 3 trees per lot, and it's a simple formula. So
okay, so and I think I can buy in on this, but one of the comments that I made towards the end of the straw poll that we had on this the last time was that this is going to be the most contentious part of bringing this to council. And if it's as confusing to all of us as it is to council, we need to be able to figure out a way to clearly and concisely put in our recommendation why we are advocating for 100% mitigation. I think we all agree that this is the way to go to achieve more housing and balance the needs for trees. But we've got to be able to articulate that very well when we present this to council, because all they're going to say is, you can clear cut it and put all new trees back. And where that may be true, we need to be able to articulate that, because I know that that's going to happen in council.
Okay, Commissioner Beeson.
Okay, I'm on board with the 100% mitigation. I think I said that last time. I am having a bit of trouble following. I think that a general request, maybe it's a question that I have for Janessa. I guess I just want to confirm. We're going through and having this discussion, and there is a lot of detail here about how you're going to modify this. I think I'd just like to clarify, when you come back in January, prior to that, I want to assume that you're going to give us an updated draft of this with all of the changes incorporated in it so we can, I see your head nodding. So we have a chance to try to read through and really understand it, right?
Yes, I was going to say some of the confusion is the fact that we're kind of talking about significant changes to the draft,
Right.
which is hard to keep in your brain without it, without seeing it.
So assuming we're going to do that, and then I think that starts, because I agree with Commissioner Borofsky, we're going to need to be able to be clear about this as it goes to council. And I think that'll then give us an opportunity, once we really understand what all this is, then to understand how to articulate it. Because I have kind of a specific question, and maybe I'll just wait until you give us another draft. I'm sort of curious about this exemption for R2 that we keep talking about. I really wasn't getting from you, where that's going to go. And maybe I just don't need that right now. And maybe what you'll do is put that in, and then I'll be able to figure it out.
Prior to putting it in, though, I will need the straw poll direction on that, because that's a new change that hasn't been through here yet. So I would need Planning Commission to agree that you would like me to add that exemption for R2. And the reasoning for R2 is that that's another zone where we see by right multifamily development, and depending on the size of the lot and that can be a significant number of units on a smaller lot. And so that's where is to do 100% mitigation. If the requirement is to provide 1 tree per dwelling unit, that could be problematic.
Okay. Well, I think I'm kind of I think I'm with the idea that we would, and in support of the idea we'd add that exemption. I was just flipping through multiple pages here on my desk trying to figure out where it was you were putting it. So let me just leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to put myself in the queue here. I see Commissioner Fragola, your hand is up, right? I just had a couple of things here. First of all, I'm sorry, of course, Commissioner Taylor as well. It's the term exemption that I'm not tracking what we're talking about with R2, and it just leads me to believe, well, what happens to the other R's? 1.5, 3, and 4, are they already exempted, or is it one that's already exempted? So what is not exempted? That's starting to. I'm not sure exactly what we mean when we say exempt. And if it's that chart that you went by there.
Right here. So this sub 3, we would add R2 medium density residential to this list right here.
Is that 9.6885 too?
It is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So what is left then?
R1.
So R1 is the only zone that would be part of the adjustment review or part of the whole shooting match?
The whole
thing.
The whole subsection.
Got it. So we're adding R2. Okay. Oh, that makes perfect sense now. Thank you for that clarification. And my second question was about under what circumstance do we leave, if any, do we leave an adjustment review option, or are we just getting rid of an adjustment review altogether at this point?
The proposal to do the 100% mitigation by right is only for the area that's not part of the South Hills area. And so the adjustment option would still have value for properties that fall in the other two zones, or areas rather.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense to me now. I got it. Thank you. So Commissioner Fragola, I know your hand was up, and then I've got Commissioner Taylor here.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Ramey, your last question clarified one of mine about the exemption from R2. I wanted to see where it was in the code. And based on a better understanding and based on the fact that that is sometimes multifamily housing, I would support that. I hope I'm getting that right. I'm still wanting to go back to the adjustment review piece. So again, my understanding, that's in 9.803013C, which we were just looking at before, right? And so basically when we discussed doing the 100% mitigation by right, we also discussed moving the adjustment review language also into that section. Is that correct, Janessa?
Correct.
And-
We talked about this subsection D being somehow tailored in a clear and objective way to address if there's a 100% by right mitigation allowance, to have kind of that outcome expectation of how many trees would be required.
Okay, and what about section C?
That is the section that this is part of the review and the justification for the adjustment, and this was the section that I believe Commissioner Taylor is going to propose to remove that from the adjustment review criteria.
So that was part of the adjustment review, and it was something that when you're moving the adjustment review language into the place regarding the 100% mitigation by right, this was something that might have been included.
No, it's too discretionary.
This is, I think I can connect a couple dots here.
Okay, great.
So when Commissioner Taylor was talking about when you're designing a development, that you're balancing a lot of different factors and terrain and where to put the streets and where to grade for utilities and different, there's a lot of different things that each one of them can have a big impact or a weight in terms of how you design something. This set of kind of priority expectations on considering which trees you're saving can be problematic and at odds with other important design elements that go into how they lay out as a particular development. So these criteria were pulled from the discretionary track. However, we've heard from a number of stakeholders who use the code that these are difficult to do sometimes, and that those conflicts arise with other important factors that they have to try to consider as they're designing the developments. So there was a lot of kind of energy around this particular approval criterion being inserted into the adjustment review criteria.
So Commissioner Taylor, you were proposing to add this to the adjustment. It was added to the adjustment review, and you're proposing to remove it just from the adjustment review.
Commissioner Taylor, you're muted.
Commissioner Fraga, sorry about that. I would stay focused. I do have some comments in the adjustment review, but I would stay focused on just 9.68852. Should we exempt R2? And then let's get to the adjustment review.
I'm just trying to understand the moving pieces. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely get it. And if you want me to answer that in order to understand R2.
I can wait. Thank you.
Okay, so great. Do you want me to continue?
Yes, why don't you go ahead? And then I've got Commissioner Beeson. Your blue hand is up, but I'm not sure if that's because you want to speak or because your blue hand got left up. So thank you. So Commissioner Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to echo what Commissioner Borofsky said. So I do think it would be helpful for us to, as a planning commission, maybe with the staff's assistance, to have a cover letter or some kind of letter to the commission. The circumstances have changed since this process has started. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and that there are different moving parts. And really, you all know what has kind of significantly changed, and that is from the state. They have mandated and that they have acknowledged the housing crisis and mandated that codes be updated to reflect House Bill 2001 and 2003. So with that said, I also think it's really important in this process to acknowledge context. So one of the city council's objectives was to increase trees, and we are doing that. So we're getting so far into the weeds that we've forgotten the context. So this isn't about, it's not that mitigation isn't prioritizing trees. We have a great urban forest, and mitigation will maintain the forest. In fact, there'll be newer trees, more appropriate species that are on the plant list rather than trees that were planted by neighbors that actually won't have a long life, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important. So we've actually increased, with these standards, increased the number of trees within our urban growth boundary. I don't want to get to the place where we move from the context of what is now to prioritizing prioritizing trees, which the current with the code, without our proposed changes and some of the other things we're going to consider, we are actually prioritizing trees over many important code standards like increased housing. So I'm just trying to look at it still in the same balance of what our objective is, which is needed housing, balancing a lot of other criteria, and acknowledging City Council's requests that we look at and consider trees, which we are robustly. Yeah, so that's it.
Okay, I see Commissioner Edwards, your hand is up, and I'm hoping we're moving towards a straw poll on R2 here. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. I just want to chime in and make a couple of points that I think that would be helpful for, especially with regards to the concerns that City Council might have. I do agree with Commissioner Taylor that we would be increasing the urban forest and put more housing compatible trees with it. And, I think that that's a big piece that we should acknowledge. I mean, at the end of the day, we would theoretically see more trees in neighborhoods, but that are also more compatible with housing. And then the other thing is that, I know that the environmental impact is important. And I think for carbon sequestration and climate change and all of those other reasons, but I do want to point out that wood in the built environment also sequesters carbon. And so when you cut down trees and then you build houses, you actually get double benefit because you now put wood housing that will also sequester carbon. And so I think that it's a win-win. And I think that, like I said, the ability to mitigate with trees that are not compatible with the housing, because I agree with Commissioner Taylor, most developers want to keep the trees that make sense to keep and for lots of different reasons. But if it disallows being able to build a structure somewhere because of preserving a certain number of trees, I think that this gets us to other goals. And so I just want to point that out. And if it's something we put in a memo to City Council or something else, I think that's an important point to acknowledge, that wood in a built environment also sequesters carbon. So that's my 2 cents there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Edwards. Janessa, am I correct in thinking we should straw poll this R2 exemption?
Yes.
Okay. So does everybody know what we're talking about? Are we all clear on that? Okay. And I can't remember how we do that. Do I just say who wants to do this and then we show our hands? Is that simple?
If we could do a straw poll, yes, a yes vote would result in adding an exemption for R2 to the existing list of exemptions.
All the R's are covered except for one then. Okay. All right, all those who in favor of that, just show your hand. This is adding R2 to the exempted list. So 1, 2, 3, wait a minute, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I got a 7-0 unanimous count. Thank you.
Great.
And
can I make a quick suggestion, Chris, Commissioner Ramey? Janessa, do you want to look at that code language and see if maybe it's simpler to just say it only applies to R1? So it doesn't, right now, the way it's worded, that's essentially what it means. But rather than have all that language,
sorry.
No, anyways, anyways, that's it.
We can. I just do want to point out that we do have some other special area zones that are equivalent to R1. And so the reason that it was written that way is because it's not, it's easy to think of it as R1, but there are some other low density kind of residential zones or portions of those zones, sub areas that this would apply to.
Okay. And then I believe, excuse me, our next direction to you was about the adjustment review section, and how can we help you move forward there?
It feels like we've discussed a lot on the subsection C and the removal. So I'm wondering if that's an easy one to determine, if we could do a straw poll on that, or discuss if you, or see if you want to discuss it a little bit more before voting on removal of the entire subsection C.
So what's being proposed is removing subsection C from the adjustment review process. An adjustment review is currently only available above 900 feet in the South Hills, and we're thinking about adding it elsewhere. Or we did straw vote, we did, no, wait a minute. Yes, okay. So it's a pretty narrow application of this, but maybe that doesn't matter. So it's just removing subsection C here.
And I just put, you should be able to see subsection C on the screen.
Are there any questions about that? Okay, everybody had a chance to read it. People still reading it, so go ahead. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and suggest that we vote now. You see, Commissioner Edwards, you're still, it looks like you're still reading. Are you? Okay, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote now on removing section C from the adjustment review portion of the code. Hands up, straw vote. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, good to go on that one.
Okay. At this point, Commissioner Taylor, I don't know if you want to bring up, I know you had some other suggestions on this, on the criteria. I have not had a chance to look at that. So if you want to bring that up for discussion and straw polls as required.
Does that work, Commissioner Ramey? I mean, I don't want to, I just followed up directly. So if other people have comments, obviously jump in. Can you do me a favor, Janessa, and just scroll up? Or sorry, scroll down.
Sorry.
Dyslexic. There we go. I just have a question. Overall, my only question is, where did the numbers come from in subsection 2B? Just out of curiosity, because if you, so for all other developments, the proposed design must either provide 1 tree per dwelling unit or the following. So B, I'm not sure it will ever be chosen necessarily. So I'm just, because 1 tree per dwelling, if you have a single family house and you've got a subdivision, I think that ratio is great. When you get to the other one, just kind of tell me what your thoughts were around that. I mean, now that R2 is removed, it's less complicated, because it got really complicated with R2. But now with R1, is it still applicable? Kind of talk me through that.
So I agree with the removal of R2. I'm not sure that subsection 2B formula is as relevant anymore. That was a way to try to address your concerns that you stated previously about if you had a multifamily development, you had a lot of dwelling units, but a smaller, a small property that you're fitting them onto. 1 tree per dwelling unit could be a lot of trees and too much to fit onto the available space. So the 1 tree per 8 inches of diameter breast height removed below the minimum preservation requirement. So if you recall, like you have the 40% preservation requirement, then 50% could be mitigated by right. So that brought you down to the 20% effectively being preserved. Or well, actually for the adjustment review, I suppose this would be the 40%. So you've got your 40% of diameter breast height on the site that's required to be preserved. So this would give you the formula where you would use that diameter breast height sum and basically translate it into some number of trees that would be required to be planted for the development site. The idea between the numbers picked, 8 inches is what we consider a significant tree. So that was why we chose the conversion factor to be 8 inches diameter breast height to signify one replacement tree. But that again isn't coming from the total number of significant trees on the development site, and that total sum that you're determining, it would be off of you would use the 40% preservation DBH number, and then that's what number you would divide by 8 to determine how many trees would need to be planted. I do agree though that with the removal of with the addition of R2 being exempt, this particular subparagraph is not likely to be necessary. Because I think we are dealing with a situation now where the 1 tree per dwelling unit is going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my proposal to the Planning Commission would be to remove subsection 2B. I also have some other concerns about the 80 inches and then 10. For instance, there's a lot of, an 80-inch significant tree is really not necessarily found within our UGB, but you are going to see 24 inches, 30 inches. So if you've got 20 inches, for instance, that's 4 trees. So that we're more than doubling the amount of trees, which once again, I'm not sure I'm necessarily a proponent of that within that preservation, the mitigation. So I actually think the removal of 2B, now that we're just talking about R1, makes sense. So 2A would be the applicable standard under this section. So remove B is my proposal.
The straw poll that I would recommend then would be to adjust subsection, this subsection, I'll clarify what number that is, to only provide for 1 tree per dwelling unit and remove subsection B. So this would become just a 2. There would be no longer A, B.
Okay, any other questions about that? So we'll move to a straw poll now. We're removing subsection B. All those who are in favor of that, show your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I got a 7-0 unanimous. Thank you.
Okay.
And
can I get clarity on that? Just that it also involves modifying the rest of the subsection, because removal of sub B is a little too. I don't want to leave a hanging egg.
You need to hold on. I think that
was that.
Yeah.
I saw all heads nodding. I think there. Yeah. So.
Proponent of you being grammatically correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other suggested changes to the remaining adjustment review criteria for tree preservation? I'm not seeing any. Okay, so I'm going to go switch back over to our list real quick. Whoops. I'm taking, just so you know, this is a PDF version, so I'm not able to type into it like I did previously, but I'm capturing the notes on paper in front of me. So we've dealt with line item 24 now. So the next stops or line items that I had were 25 through 29, and those were ones that were not highlighted to stop. So unless there's something that a commissioner wants to elevate at this time within that set. I see Commissioner Taylor might have raised her hand.
Oh yes, Commissioner Taylor.
I just have a suggestion, and you might have already caught this, Janessa, and I'm sorry if I'm not following. I haven't been using this table as much. I've been really staying with the code. So I just had a comment on the next adjustment review standard, which is 37 street standards adjustment. And that's the EC 9.803037B, which is directly below the one we just addressed. And we already changed a code section earlier to EC 9.68103. So I'm just assuming you're going to change this to be applicable with what we had changed the last meeting. So it has to do, we added the ability to line with existing streets and existing buildings on the site. And maybe, so there's some interesting, so if we're adjusting street standards, let me see, why did I refer, this is on the, just due to at least the following. No, I actually, no, sorry, because sorry, I guess what's more important is that when the time comes, I'd love to see the language on the other one to make sure the adjustment review and the language of what we propose, because you were going to look at the existing buildings, for instance, on site, make sure that the two are cohesive. Sorry, that was a little, so I think maybe hold on this and see what the language you propose for the other code section is.
Okay, I think I'm following. So this is related to follow-up items on the street connectivity and the exceptions that will be brought back in January when I return. And so if I'm understanding correctly, then you're just kind of wanting to bring it up that as I look at those and come up with any changes based on that direction, to also be considering whether there's any impacts to the adjustment review criteria.
Thank you. Yes,
Yep.
sorry, that was a roundabout way of saying that exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anything specific to be captured in 37B that you had in mind, or is it just the wanting to make sure that we're cohesive?
Yeah, just cohesive, because I noted where the reason why I brought it up at B, subsection B2, actually might not need to be there anymore. So this adjustment review criteria, do you see what I'm saying? It's not consistent potentially with the code section that you're going to be revising.
Great.
But I'm not sure we need to go in the details. That's where I stopped. I realized, oh, we don't have anything to talk about to compare it to yet. Okay.
Okay, great. I've got that captured in the note to myself too. Okay, so I'll go back to the straw poll. Oops. Sorry, my scroll is a little hyperactive. Okay, was that the only one in that subsection, or no?
Oh my gosh. I have to say this is embarrassing. I don't know. I did my homework. So so the next one I have is EC 9.8100. So that's going to be on page, I'll try to do that if that's helpful, because I realize I can talk fast. So that's the conditional use permit approval criteria. And on the PC agenda package, it was page 30. It's page 27 to 38 on the November 18th materials. So what I would propose, first I have a question, and I think the answer is yes, but I just want to make sure, is that in subsection 4, did you review those criteria that you're dropping into this for clear and objective? Like, did you address that? Were there any challenges that those presented? I'm assuming you did your homework, but that was my only, I looked at 4 and I was like, oh, it's including a lot of other code sections that could be quite discretionary and land us into some trouble. But if you looked at them, that's all. I just had a question. If you had any.
I want to qualify what I mean by looked at them. These are the only standards that we put into this section are standards that are already other needed housing track or clear and objective tracks already also point to. So my limited legal, I'm not an attorney representative, and Lauren, jump in if you need to, but my understanding is we already have a clear and objective code. So to some extent, I did not do an extensive analysis to determine that whether standards that are already applicable in a clear and objective context are clear and objective by my standards or my judgment. And so we were looking at consistency with other clear and objective tracks, consistency with discretionary track. So there was a lot going on, but what we added were things that were already applicable to other needed housing projects. And so I didn't do an in-depth analysis for each of those code sections.
Okay.
Lauren, if there's anything that you want to add to that from the
no, Janessa, I think I would just echo what you said. My understanding is that the specifically called out code sections are already applicable to clear and objective application tracks.
Okay, so great. I just wanted to make sure there weren't decisions out there that potentially might alert us to some updates of those code sections, some prior LUBA decisions or something. That's great. So number 5, I can go to subsection 5. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit, and it looks like public improvements as required by land use code. This is, so there's a lot of the applications have this particular criterion, and this one is a very good example because so I'm going to talk broad because some of the other code sections actually don't have subsection A and B, which I think are really important. So there are some code sections under partition and subdivision that basically say public improvements are required by this land use code or as a condition of you added, or is it, in this one it has, or as a condition of approval, will be completed prior to issuance of a development permit. So what happens so if you imagine if public improvements had to be actually approved, so they're privately engineered public improvements have to be approved and completed before the issuance of CUP or a PUD, you can understand that that is a lot to ask for an owner because they do not have a final conclusion of their land use application, a PUD or a CUP. So I think that wherever there's public improvements, it should not stop the issuance of, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So I'll stay here. I'm going to confuse people. Completed prior to issuance of a development permit. So it's basically saying you can't issue a development permit. So you go in for your building permit. They're saying the public improvements have to be complete before you can get a development permit. The way that sites are constructed, that is from a construction scheduling standpoint and efficiency doesn't necessarily make sense. I do understand the concern that they are built and they're built as required. So I think as long as a PEPI is approved, if you have a condition of approval in your CUP or PUD, tentative subdivision, then, and the condition of approval can actually have subsection A or B, I think issuing a development permit is fine. So oftentimes I'll work with staff to do exactly this because it's very difficult. So let's not make it expensive and difficult. Let's allow the issuance of a development permit while the public improvements, they should be approved, but not constructed. It's the constructed piece that is really the red flag for me. So this code section, it looks great. There are this same language comes in other locations and is not as comprehensive. So let me read it one more time. As required by land use code or as a condition of approval will be completed or those things happen. That's exactly right. Because that basically, then the owner's taking some risk by doing the A or B. Because honestly, they're going to do A or B before they're going to complete them. That's the typical process. So I don't have any changes on this one, sorry, but there are others. So I've already talked. And number 6, can you provide an explanation of this standard? You provided it to me and I thought you did a great job just so Planning Commission understands, because I think Commissioner Borofsky brought this up. It's the findings to demonstrate consistency with constitutional requirements that actually is the important piece to that. So if you can just briefly describe that, I think it might help because I feel comfortable with this section. But I did have questions.
Right. So when I discussed this one with Commissioner Taylor, one of the points that I made was that this is a standard that's a little bit of a kind of safety net standard that likely will rarely, if ever, get triggered, that improvements would be justifiable based on being able to make constitutional requirements, findings about constitutional requirements. So I just wanted to kind of give a little context that this isn't when you read a standard, sometimes you don't know whether that's going to apply to absolutely every single development that comes through our office, or if it's 5% of developments or 1% of developments. So just understanding that this is one of those standards that it gives us a kind of the ability to, if we can make, there's a lot of ifs to it, if you'll notice, if we can make constitutional findings, if there's a need to require the connections within a quarter mile, so these are very small pieces, small areas, to these different points that we would like to see connected in our overall system, then this just gives us the ability to try to make a case for that. We're not, and it's consistent with how we do other, the discretionary conditional use permit has a very discretionary similar criterion. And this was trying to do a more clear and objective approach to get those improvements if we need them and if we can justify them in the future. I'll leave it there and see if Althea, do you want to add anything to that for her context, or maybe we just see if anybody has any additional questions on it?
I think you captured that perfectly, but happy to help with questions too.
Commissioner Taylor, do you feel I left anything out from our conversation? Thanks. Okay. So no specific changes to this one proposed? Okay.
So you want me to go to my next one before you get to the yellow? I have a couple more. So I just want to, commissioners, I would like to put this on a list. The applicability of partition tentative plan applications, it's the same with subdivisions. This has been, know that these application processes are very expensive for owners to go through. And whenever a PUD is required, there's an element of redundancy with a partition in a PUD and a subdivision in a PUD. So, I think and I know Janessa addressed it really well in her response, that it's kind of, that's one of those creeping pieces. So I think leaving it is fine. I do think that when we get to House Bill 2001, 2003, that particular piece should be looked at, because these are very expensive applications, not necessarily the city filing fee, but all the consultants needed in order to support these applications. They're very expensive. So let's look at where there's redundancy and eliminate duplicative applications. So I just want to say that on the record right now. And it's with partitions and subdivisions in conjunction with PUDs. And I recognize there might be some other consequences that code language, it gets more complicated. So I think Janessa's comment is well taken. Just want to note it.
Okay. What's your next subsection that's not to the yellow yet? And I'll scroll.
I think you captured the 8205, which was
that's the tentative.
Yeah, there was some interesting language that Renee had addressed that was a little awkward, but it looks like you caught it.
What section are we in, right? Or
let me see if I can find my notes on the, I'm using my notes rather than my, hang on. 18, 19. I think, so it's the applicability section, which is there. It's subsection 2. actually, I'm looking at it, it doesn't look like you changed it. You slightly changed it. I would just take a look at that language and let's make sure it's saying exactly what you want it to. If the partition tentative plan application is not reviewed concurrently with the tentative PUD, no development permit shall be issued by the city prior to approval of the tentative. If the tentative partition is reviewed concurrently with the tentative PUD, no development permit shall be issued by the city. Okay, so there's two parts to that. Sorry, this is going fast for me and I even took a bunch of notes. I think that I'm not sure what your thinking is around concurrent. I don't understand why in the tentative PUD there can't be a condition of approval, that you have to actually wait for a PUD to be complete before you can do the partition tentative plan. Because a PUD with a condition of approval, they have to wait for that to occur anyways. And they're going to do it because it's anyway. So this is also in the subdivision. Both these sections, they're consistent. It just doesn't necessarily make sense to me. So if for some reason there's lag time in the team and they're offset, I don't understand it. So
can I ask a clarifying question, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Are you thinking that the statement saying that a development permit would mean that you couldn't apply for the tentative partition if you didn't do it concurrently, but if you did a gap, like, because development permits are specifically defined.
Let me read. If the partition tentative is not reviewed concurrent with the no development shall be issued by the city prior to if the tenant concurrent with the no development permit shall be issued prior to the approval. Yeah, no, that's where, no, you're right, Janessa. There's something, Renee caught it too. Sorry, I need to look at it more, but you might want to take a look at it. It's a little awkward. It's something.
It was, I will say that it was a little bit awkward to come up with language, but the reason that there's awkward language is because it would have been simpler to just assume that we're forcing PUDs and land divisions to go concurrently. We have to allow for the flexibility of this is the developer's choice to either process them concurrently and in tandem, or whether to, so there may be a reason that they would prefer to do a tentative PUD, wait, spread it out, do a tentative land division, and then come back to finalize. So we needed to address kind of all the universe of possibilities that we could see in terms of the timing of these applications.
So, but I think it's the last sentence. So this is why, and sorry, I didn't spend more time on this one, really trying to understand it. I was up late last night doing this. So, I think it's if you read that last sentence, if the tentative partition is reviewed concurrently with a tentative PUD application, no development permit shall be issued by the city prior to the approval of the final PUD. So this is almost saying you can go ahead and submit a development permit at the approval of a tentative PUD application and potentially a tentative partition, or I don't know. It's awkward because you actually need a final PUD application to submit a development permit application. So it might just not be needed. Anyways, I just didn't understand what you were trying to necessarily achieve. Now I understand the first sentence. Because it's basically saying, yeah, if you have an active land use application, you can't submit a development permit. That's essentially what it's saying. But then that's where I got confused by the second one and if it had an implication to the first sentence. I don't think we need to spend more time. I would look at it a little bit more. It's very, and maybe it's worded okay, maybe Lauren, but when I read it, it's definitely perplexing a little bit, awkward. And Renee caught it too. And I think Carol did also. So if there's three of us that have looked at it and we're users, I think, anyways, this might be something to look at.
Alyssa, do you have any thoughts on this one, or I'm not sure what to do with it without a little more specific direction on what to do with it, because to me, and sometimes I have the problem of I understand what it means, and so my brain doesn't catch the sticking point necessarily, and so given that, I guess I would like a little bit more direct feedback on it. Alyssa, are you gonna?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I think it's been a while since I've looked at this piece, but I knew what it meant then, and I think I would want to know a little bit more what the issue is, or how you would solve it.
Is it safe to just try to follow up a little bit more to understand it a little bit more with Kristen and Renee and Carol, and try to kind of get a little bit more specific feedback from the stakeholders who weighed in on it, and then I could bring it up again at the follow-up in January if it seems like there's a suggested rewording or something that comes out of that. And do we need and Lauren, I guess this is my question to you. Do I need a straw poll? Because I'm in this is a little bit of an ambiguous area for me.
Janessa, I guess the question is, staff is free to kind of hear planning commission comments, think about it, and bring changes back if you feel they are warranted without a straw poll. If planning commission wants to be sure that planning commission is getting a certain set of changes back and wants to give staff that direction, then I would say planning commission should do a straw poll. I'm hearing that Commissioner Taylor would like that done. I've not heard from other planning commissioners at this point.
Let's see, Commissioner Beeson, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got specific comment on it. I find myself as I listen thinking the expedient, or maybe the best way, is for Janessa and Commissioner Taylor and maybe a few others to talk about this and put the language together as they think it ought to be to meet the concerns that they're talking about, and just bring it back to us in January, maybe with a little bit of background information, and then we can consider it then. Just a suggestion.
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
I support that as well. And actually now I realize what I did. I kind of mixed up my notes. So I do want to go back to subsection 1 after we're done with this.
So I think what I'm hearing is that the commission is interested in this, but not to the degree to try to over direct staff. So it's almost like, please take a look at this and come back. If you need to circle back with Commissioner Taylor or other experts as you do that, that's fine with us.
Okay, I think that based on what Lauren said, what has been said, I feel comfortable not doing a straw poll. Okay.
My sense is the commission's comfortable with that as well. Okay, Commissioner Taylor, back to whatever that was. Number 1, was it?
Yeah, number 1, and I realized I just had some of my notes. I kind of mixed it up. I had some. Anyways, I would like to propose, this is the one I originally was talking about and confused the two, is I'm going to propose at this point, it's the second sentence, if a partition application that also involves a PUD request is not submitted concurrently with the tentative PUD, the partition application may not be submitted until a tentative PUD is approved. This is the one I don't understand it. So if you can provide some information, that's great. What I would propose is that the tentative PUD will just have a condition of approval regarding the partition application. I don't see any reason why you'd have to wait, because then you've got time delays. You didn't happen to get them in concurrently for whatever reason. You've got this tentative PUD. You've got to wait till that process is totally complete before you can even start to review a partition. That's if they weren't submitted concurrently. So I guess I'd like to have a little bit more information, and if it's possible to condition the PUD, I think that's much more favorable. And this is going to be a repeat. This is exactly the same in the subdivision section.
Commissioner Borowski, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you to the commission and Commissioner Taylor for doing all of this hard work. I am beginning to get a little bit uncomfortable with the direction that this meeting's going. We've had several opportunities for the public to weigh in on all of this. And then we're getting this information thrown at us at the last minute. And I'm starting to feel a little bit uneasy about making decisions outside of the public process. You know, I mean, Commissioner Taylor deals with this on a regular day-to-day basis, and I certainly appreciate all of that. But yet, we're taking her input and putting it into the code, and other people may have input on that after. You know, they may have a different view of what her feeling on that is, and I'm not sufficiently versed in the code using it. I'm just getting a little bit uneasy and making the whole commission. I don't know. I'm just feeling a little bit uneasy. I just wanted to put that out.
I see Commissioner Taylor's hand up, Commissioner Ramey.
So thank you, Commissioner Borowski. You know, I do want to clarify something. These are not my opinions. I'm actually looking at public testimony. So everything I've brought up has actually been included in the public testimony. So, and we're also at a level of detail right now that, quite frankly, I don't think a lot of the public necessarily even weighed in on. So I took a little deeper dive and at the request of staff to kind of look at it, look more closely at what my comments might be today. And they are consistent with my comments throughout the process, as well as consistent with public testimony. So I am not speaking on behalf of myself. So I just want to clarify that. Just look at past comments from, there are several in this particular package, because Renee and Carol took a deeper dive as the public. And that's essentially what I did at this level, is looked at their comments. So it is public testimony. They also provided, as well as a handful of others in prior comments. And in terms of the larger group of population, this level of detail, I'm not sure. Quite frankly, I'm sure it might have just not been addressed because that level of detail they're not necessarily looking at. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Okay. Can we keep moving?
Yes. I think that still falls within the looking at this whole section and trying to understand it better. And so I'm comfortable moving forward if the commission is.
Yes, Commissioner Fregula.
I'd like to say that, you know, I am absolutely in support of removing barriers to housing development. And when I prepared for this meeting, I did look at the specific sections that were highlighted in the crosswalk that Janessa provided to us. So I don't feel as prepared regarding this section, and I apologize for that. So I'm supportive of the direction to staff to take a look at it and review it, but I hope that any changes that are made or thinking that's applied to it, I'm assuming when it comes back to us in the final draft, you'll provide some thinking and support in those areas. Great, thanks for the head nod.
Okay, let me go back to, I need to get my bearings again on the list. So the next highlighted one isn't until the 9.8325. So are there any other comments or questions on sections in between?
Commissioner Taylor, yes.
So 9.8220 subsection 1, which is the next section. I just wanted to ask you where the 3 times came from. I just would love to have an explanation of that.
So
I have
that,
go ahead.
that's one that is an existing goal 5 standard that was written. I was not here. I was not part of that. So I can't say where the 33% came up. It was kind of outside of the scope of this project.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there more sections before 8325? Okay. Then I'm going to move us to this 9.8325 subsection 7B is the next one that I had highlighted as a straw poll point. There was a request to use net acres instead of gross acres, and I had, hopefully you had a chance to read my staff response on why staff proposed to use just gross acres instead of net acres, the calculation. And anytime you're starting to exclude things, you have to come up with clear and objective ways to describe what can be excluded. And so it gets way more complicated. So if the direction is to do that, then staff can certainly come up with something that gets us there. That's just the reasoning behind why we chose gross acres. And that's when, let me come over to the section and let you see the text too. So there's the staff, there's the subsection, and then there's the testimony and the response regard that I mentioned.
Yes, Commissioner Taylor.
I would like to, once again, based on public comments, I agree with the argument. I actually think net acres is I prefer net acres for the arguments provided in public testimony. If it's the development site, remember there's going to be a lot of other requirements. You know, there's going to be potentially public or private streets, which are that's part of the developable area, obviously. And if you're not taking the net, you're going to have those actual sites are going to get smaller and smaller based on environmental requirements, the infrastructure improvements, if there's any sensitive kind of other environmental issues. So I actually think for open space requirements, what is the net acres is actually more appropriate. So that's what I would propose. Or a better solution.
Commissioner Borowski.
Oh, Commissioner Borowski, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I also in my notes had that as a yes to go to the net acres on that. So there you go.
So I too had that. This is one of maybe 8 issues that I flagged from the beginning that I thought was interesting. And Janessa, just so I'm clear on your, it seems that calculating the net is a much more complicated approach. And that was my only concern about going to net, was it would add a level of complication, but it sounds like Commissioner Taylor, that might be worth the trade-off at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it.
Althea, this is one where I would be interested in your perspective if you have anything to add, or Alyssa.
Sure, thank you, Janessa. And commissioners, I certainly hear the point about net acres and absolutely understand that as you go through the development process, that net acreage changes a little bit. And I think that that's maybe where there's a potential concern if net acres are used. Like if anything later on in the process, the size of a street changed or other infrastructure changed that changed the amount of net acreage, it would just be really important that that calculation be correct at the start of the process, or an applicant may end up needing to adjust the amount of open space they're providing to meet this standard So I think it's feasible either way, but I see it becoming more complicated potentially with net acreage being used.
Commissioner Fragola.
And when you say complicated, you mean complicated for the applicant?
That is correct.
As well, I would add as well as for staff to determine. It's twofold. It's both sides. My concern is more in terms of making that clear and objective, and we would need to have a very specific list of what can be taken out and have that be something that's not a point of contention or pushing, being pushed in a staff position to, well, but is that really something? Then it gets into a realm that makes me uncomfortable from the clear and objective standpoint, that then we could be opening ourselves up to a legal challenge on the clear and objective nature of how we calculate net acreage. Alyssa or Lauren, do you have anything to add? Or beyond that, I think that it really is a commission policy direction on what we use. So that we're kind of putting out there what our concerns are and why we proposed gross acres instead of net acres. However, you can also consider there's merits to both sides of it. So I think that it really is something just for you all to discuss and give us the direction on.
Okay, any further comments, questions from commissioners? Okay, so I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Moving currently, the code is written gross, so the proposed code is written gross, and the proposal, you show your hand if you would like to move to net rather than gross. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Commissioner Taylor, 7. Thank you.
And the next item is going down to B1, clarification on why lot size determines size of open space. And I think this was one that I flagged for a straw poll. Yeah, so this was one of the kind of policy calls. So it's too much text for me to read to you, so I'll let everybody kind of digest that and then discuss.
So, Janessa, was this the one where we got testimony where they thought that by doing this, it would kind of disincentivizing making smaller lots because of the large amount of open space? That's kind of what I remembered, and I don't think that that's a direction that I would like to see going. I think that smaller lots are something that we've seen direction from coming out of the state, coming out of the city, coming out of a lot of the housing advocates, the need for, and so I think I would be in favor of doing something to minimize the tie to the large open spaces. To, if you have a huge PUD, then you're going to have a huge amount of open space, which would mean less lots. So
a little contextual help for this one is also the way that this standard was revised. The original standard was a straight 40% open space requirement for PUDs, and that applied if they were not within a quarter of a mile to a public open space area. So we changed that quarter mile to a half a mile, and that alone significantly reduces the number of potential development sites where this on-site open space requirement would even be triggered. So this is one of those where we talked a lot about it in the deliberations on the first draft code. You might recall we set the minimum amount of space based on kind of that pocket park that I believe Commissioner Baker had brought up, and that the commission kind of agreed that was a good minimal area. And so there's a lot to this code section, and that kind of belies the fact that it's not going to apply very often. So in terms of a threat to small lot development in Eugene, I don't think that that is a legitimate concern for me, given the narrowness of the applicability of these standards when these standards would be triggered. So, and we also, previously there wasn't a cap on the size of the development site. This was why we created the cap. Before it even applies, it needs to be a 2-acre or larger development site. So one of my staff suggestions is, before we get too much into really tweaking the language there, is to offer a simpler suggestion. Might be, if you're concerned about that, maybe look at the even more narrowing of the pool of when they would be applicable or triggered. Maybe make the minimum development size larger, so that it's less likely to be an onerous development standard.
So let me just back of envelope here. So if you have a 5-acre site, right now at 20%, you'd have to give an acre to open space. Is that the way it's read? On B,
If the average
20%.
If you have a 5-acre site that is not within a half a mile from a public, one of the qualifying public open space options.
Right. So then that would require a 1 acre. It would take 20% of the development site for open space.
If they were.
If you had a 10-acre site, that would take 2 acres for open space.
Janessa, can I clarify? That's for small lots, subdivisions, or developments, not all? Is that what subsection?
Correct, right. That's only if the lots are smaller than the minimum. So that this again would only be if you were reducing the lot size. And the reason for the greater open space requirement for smaller lots is the idea that you have less enjoyable outdoor space or open space on the actual little lot. And so the need to have some sort of communal open space area is proportional to that, or reversely proportional to that. So you could provide a cap too. So that's another option that might be a simpler adjustment. Is, to your point, Commissioner Borowski, the larger you go, the more significant that feels. We tried to get to proportionality kind of the other way around, but I can see what you're pointing out, and maybe a no more than such and such. In no case shall it be more than this much.
Yeah. Commissioner Taylor.
So let me ask you a question, Janessa. So really what this code section's really addressing is R1, single family housing, any housing that doesn't, so be a single family house or a duplex, because open space is also required as part of a multifamily. So really, if this is a smaller than lot area for a PUD, this is really targeting essentially single family homes or a duplex. Am I correct? Because you already have open. So if the PUD includes lot area smaller than the minimum lot area allowed in the base zone, So, so essentially open space, it's a little redundant is what I'm saying. If anything is above 3 or more units, it's going to have an open space requirement that's actually applicable for multifamily standards. So this is really looking at a percentage of open space. You're either being redundant because you got a PUD larger than, that's not included or that is included in multifamily standards. So that I'm uncomfortable with, because now what happens? And I'm not sure. Yeah, they're going to overlap. And I think I'd rather rely on the multifamily standards. And then if it's R1, this seems excessive. So I guess I'm a little, because I had just a more open-ended questions on this one. I also would propose net acres also on this as well. And I'm fine with a flat percentage. It feels a little arbitrary to go to flat percentage. So that's where I was going to say, are there other code sections that maybe we could rely on or look at that seem to be working? Like, I think the way the multifamily standards work, I think it actually is open. The open space section actually works fairly well. But once again, I'm not sure we need an overlap for anything above that actually includes multifamily. So if this is just R1, I think it's a little too much. So that's it.
It's R1 only if the lots are substandard and
Yep.
only if they're not within a half a mile to a public park or open space.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
Janessa, if I may, just for clarity on the standard, will we also be looking at because I know you can create lots in zones other than R1, and I'm looking at this and I'm not seeing the catch to push it just into R1. Like, would this be a R2 or R3 lot as well, potentially? Commissioner Taylor, I hear the point about open space with multifamily and wouldn't want to be duplicative, but I was just thinking about this scenario where there was maybe a lots being created in R2 or R3 where someone didn't want to do multifamily for some reason.
Correct. It's not specific. There's nothing narrowing the applicability to just R1 in this.
I think that's a really good, valid comment. So I guess I don't want duplication. That really confuses design too, quite frankly. So maybe anything that has a multifamily standard is exempt. But I also question the amount, because we're talking about essentially, potentially that lower intensity, less dense development. And we're essentially putting the burden of private developers to provide parks for the residents in a PUD. I'm not sure. I mean, I like open space. I think it's valid. I just think if you've got a ratio of 20%, as Commissioner Borofsky brought up, I think you're really, once again, are we making wise choices as to address a housing crisis?
So if I could add, I had a thought on another example is the cluster subdivision, Commissioner Taylor. That's another example of an existing land use application that allows substandard lot size, but the trade-off is there's a 25% open space requirement. And so we went under that and tried to make it a little bit more specific based on how far under, so again, a big part of our approach to the draft code standards was to try to be very specific and to narrow applicability in, to give some gradation on how a standard applies rather than just blunt one size fits all, tools that may or may be, appropriate for 10% of what we see, but not the other 90%. And so we tried to be more precise in how we applied that. But that's just an example that I thought of was the cluster subdivision, and just to give you another idea of where there's a 25% requirement of the development site being devoted, because, and that was specifically because you're doing less than standard lot sizes.
I've got Commissioner Borowski waiting.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. I think I could probably get us to where I would like to see us go with this. As in, it is a very small amount of sites because of the criteria of the half a mile from a park and minimum lot size things. That's going to narrow the number of applications that this is going to apply to. For me, I was thinking 10%, but then after Janessa said that cottage clusters are 25%, I would be willing to make a motion to change the minimum to 20 or to 15% of the development site. And I think that what this will apply to is some of the areas that are near the edge of town that may not be fully developed out, but and not hit that park. And those sometimes do have our larger PUDs, you know. So I think that if we went to 15%, that would be a policy compromise. And so I'll propose to change the minimum to 15% in section B.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor.
Commissioner Borowski, would you be willing, I did a little bit of math. Actually, there's public testimony on this also that's similar to what you're saying. So I'm wondering, consistent with our net acres, this is a really good application of net acres again. So rather than just the entire development site, look at open space relative to net acres. We could actually leave the percentage then, I think, that 5% difference. So I just thought I'd bring that up. I'm open to the percentage. Once again, I'm always uncomfortable throwing just percentages out. So that's why I ask questions, where did staff come up with the numbers, just so I can have a little bit more context. So I think net acres would potentially get at that. I also would like to propose that if it's a multifamily PUD, that this is exempt. That just rely on the multifamily standards. This is really for developments without that.
Yeah, I think I can live with that. The only question that I would have on that, Commissioner Taylor, is what if it's a mixed PUD where it has some multifamily and some single family? You know, I'm thinking over the other side of Laurel Hill where you've got, you know, part of it is multifamily and then the other 40 acres is single family. How?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And if we could, I would defer to staff and create some language. There's also whichever is greater, that kind of situation, that if there's a multifamily standard, that you can apply it to maybe the whole development site, or in areas where it's not multifamily, standards don't apply, that you can choose. I don't know. One of the examples is the project that we just recently looked at on Franklin or Broadway. Can I talk about that, Alyssa? I want to make sure I'm not, that's final, right? It's not coming back. Okay. So it was split. So actually from a design, you can actually split lots. If there's a section of multifamily that applies for open space, you're really addressing it appropriate to that. And if there's another section of the site that isn't, I think that designers can deal with that. If the language is clear. And we just did that on Franklin. Remember, a portion of the site had multifamily requirements and a portion of the site didn't.
Lauren, I'm gonna tag you real quick to see, I may need your help a little bit on wrangling this straw poll. I'm a little unclear if the way the standard reads, if it's triggered and you're doing regular size lots, it's a 10% requirement. You've already straw poll voted to go from net or gross to net acres in the first part of subsection 7. So I think that carries through all of subsection 7. However, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly that when we go down to subsection 1 and what Commissioner Borowski's proposing and getting some enhancement from Commissioner Taylor to get that in there. If we're switching those to sub B to 15%, that in a sense makes A and B indistinguishable. And so I just want to get clarity around, is the direction to basically just have it, simplify it down to, if they're regular standard size lots, it's 10% of the development site based on net acres as straw polled. If they're smaller, then rather than going whether they're 10% smaller or above 10% smaller, just if they're smaller, 15%. Does that, okay.
Yeah, I think that would be clear. We could just drop off B then, correct? That's what you were.
Yeah, we would basically take away the within 10% or more than 10%, right. And it would just be for lots smaller than the minimum lot area in the base zone, 15%.
Well, that seems clear and objective to me.
Sounds terrific. And one tiny step for a commission towards clear and objective standards here. I think we can vote on. I see we have about 4 minutes left today. So I'm hoping we can vote on this one and then talk about next steps. So straw vote, I'm sorry, Commissioner Taylor, yes.
Can we add the multifamily piece, or do you want us to wait for that? That yeah, because you do have for these open space requirements that actually you can back it up, is if it's a multifamily development, this whole section, I think if it's a multifamily development, it should be exempt.
If it's a multifamily development, then there wouldn't be lots that are being created, correct? I'm trying to decide, because part of me wants to say that this wouldn't apply to multifamily developments anyway, because
I don't know. Alyssa, have you seen, I actually am thinking about a couple of concept designs that I've done that actually it's not necessarily true. Like, I guess you'd have to common space with a development site equal or to minimum. So
I think this would apply, B, which is equivalent to the multifamily standards for 10% of the development site to open space.
Okay. Yeah, I think you might be right. Maybe if you could do me a favor and just think about that, I will too. See if there's any other implications. We can get back in January. That's a good point. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're straw voting on eliminating item B here. Is that correct?
How about we're voting to combine subsection 1A and B.
Okay. Yes.
And changing it and making it a straight 15%.
Combining subsections A and B, and 15% shall apply to the combined subsections.
Correct.
Correct. Hands up if that's what you're willing to support. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Very good. So we have.
Are you comfortable with the specificity on that one? Okay. I feel like I understand the direction there, but want to make sure we're capturing it.
So we have, commissioners, we have 2 minutes left in our time today. So I think we can ask the staff for if y'all have anything at this point, and also what our next steps are on this item.
Real quick, I just want to make sure on that last straw poll, where did we land on net acreage on A and B? Did that need to be clarified in that particular one? No.
I don't think so, because subsection 7, they voted to change it to net. That should carry through the language. I was looking at that and the language says development site, but I think because we're going to make it clear that it's net acreage up above, I think we're okay.
Okay. So just thinking ahead, your next meeting is January 12th, which is dedicated to middle housing. We did poll for 2 dates, but I don't think either of them are going to work for clear and objective. Well, one didn't work for a quorum. The other one, we would have you coming back on the 11th, which means Janessa would not get to take a winter break because her materials would be due the first week in January. And I think that seems a little unfair. So I think we're going to skip the 11th. And so I think your first meeting back on clear objective is not going to be until January 25th.
And given how deliberations are going, I'm thinking we're going to need to find a second meeting because it's going, yours are being very thorough. And so I'm going to be looking for another meeting for that sooner than, I mean, it'll have to be after the 25th, which, yeah, so we'll find another date for that. And then, so right now you have 3 meetings in January, the 12th, the 25th, and then a public hearing on the night of the 26th. We may need to send another poll around for continuing these deliberations. Janessa.
I just had the thought, it was brought up about the possibility of a kind of a PC statement or cover letter or something, and that staff could help. And so I wanted to find out, when do we need kind of a straw poll to get that direction? Is it okay, or can we kind of solidify that a little bit if there's direction for me to draft something and work with my 3 project resources, which would be Commissioners Ramey, Beeson, and Taylor, to kind of come up with something to bring back when we do come back to deliberations. I'm assuming that that's going to be something that needs to be approved by the entire commission if we're submitting it in connection with the formal recommendation when that point comes. But I just wanted clarity on whether I should start drafting that or coming up with some ideas for that.
Okay, so we're a minute over time here, but Commissioner Edwards, please go ahead.
That is what I'm raising my hand. I actually am hosting another meeting that's starting right now, so I have to drop off. I don't know if you guys can decide as a quorum without me. So I'm just letting everybody know. I apologize.
For your time today. Enjoy the holiday season.
Thank you.
Bye. Well, I can jump in as chair. I think that is a terrific idea. Some sort of cover letter that we can also use. I can take it forward as public testimony during testimony time for the council, and getting a draft before the commission somewhere around that 25th meeting, I think is a good idea. But so for me, it's a thumbs up. Okay, I'm seeing other thumbs up. So draft away. And we're what were we? Your advisory board, your resource.
Project resources, I think we call them.
Resource always available.
Thank you.
That, anything else? I don't see anything else for the good of the order. Going to close the meeting, and have a great holiday season, everyone. And we'll see you back in the middle of January 2021. Bye-bye.